My name's Louisa Parks. I'm one of the researchers in the ActEU team, and I'm a professor at the University of Trento in Italy. And what we want to talk about today with this wonderful panel is something that was raised at the end of the last panel. I'm very pleased it was, and it's the idea of, from protests to power, or the power of protests, and what protest means as a form of political participation when we're talking about these complex interrelationships with trust, with representation, with inclusion, etc. So we've got a wonderful panel here to talk about that today. Now in ActEU, we tried to depart from the assumption that protest is a completely normal part of political participation and an extremely important part of political participation. Our histories, European nation states, but also other states across the planet, have been built through moments of tension, moments of response, and that often includes protest. It's a perfectly normal part of democratic life. And if we go through sort of civil society theory, of course, we know that democracies are fragile, and acting sometimes contentiously to protect those democracies is an important part of lots of the questions that we've tried to think through in a more academic way in ActEU. But today we're going to try and talk about some of the bigger questions, because as Mikhail was saying when he opened our wonderful conference this morning, the world looks really different now already to when it looked the way it looked when we started this project. And one of the biggest changes, and I don't think I need to make lists of examples here, but one of the biggest changes is around the repression of collective action of many different forms all over the world, but including in European democracies in terms of different types of legislation, for example, which impose quite difficult sentences on certain forms of protest, the repression of some groups who are protesting rather than others, etc., etc. And I think the last couple of weeks in the US have certainly brought that home, that this happens in democracies too. And we need to think about protest as part of normal democratic life, and how to protest powerfully, meaningfully, effectively, I guess, also in contexts of increasing repression in different parts of the world. So I've got a great panel here who are going to tell us all about this. We have Maija Setälä from the University of Turku, who's also one of our scientific advisors and is, of course, a powerhouse of knowledge about democratic innovation, about participation. And my point here is, of course, that protests are often driven by social movements, but social movements don't just protest. We just tend to think of that as something quite visible that they do. But social movements are also sites of democratic innovation and all other kinds of organizing. So perhaps we can talk about that. We've also got Christian Beck here from the European Parliament. Christian Beck is currently the head of office of Daniel Freund, MEP, in the Green Group. And he has as well a long history of engagement and work around issues of not just green politics, but also, and in connection to green politics, lobby transparency, questions of participation, and questions of constitutional affairs. And then finally, we have, last but definitely not least, Mariam okay, you see, I told you I can pronounce it when we're talking in a coffee break, but when I'm in front of people, Kaulashvili-Southwell, there we go, Mariam Kaulashvili-Southwell, who is a co-founder of Daitove, which is a digital network which is helping inform, coordinate and work with protest in Georgia, and of course their repression of protest and defense of democracy is a very live issue and a very difficult issue. So I've basically got 3 or 4 questions. I might even stick to 3 and then leave more time for audience Q&A, but I'm going to sort of come to you each in turn, and then, but please feel free to add on to any question where there's anything that you'd like to add. So my first question, which is more to Professor Setälä, to give you your correct title, so. And that's about something we've been talking about a little bit in the project, is kind of the variety of what goes on with protest, what goes on in social movements, different types of political participation outside of these more formal moments like elections, etc. And one thing that we've been thinking about in terms of democratic innovation and participation is the idea of how this kind of participation translates into impact, and how we can think about what impact is. So what makes participation matter? So I'll come to you first to ask a bit about your thoughts on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, now, got my voice heard. Okay, thanks for the question. It's a really tricky one, and I have to say I'm not an expert on protest as such, so I'm basically interested in democratic innovations. But I think, so more broadly, of course, what's going on in streets and protest and activism can change people's attitudes and can change discourses in the society, how people perceive things and how issues are framed and so forth. So there are these kind of long, winding battles over discourses and over people's attitudes. They can also, these new ideas can also create backlash, as we already discussed earlier in the earlier panel, but I think that's a kind of a long way of changing societal viewpoints. But then we, of course, have in democratic systems, we also have institutions that aim to channel people's claims and views to political system more directly. So we have the traditional institutions of representative democracy, parties, elections, so forth, which are expected to mediate people's views to the political decision making. But we also have democratic innovations, which are new types of institutions created to deepen and improve the quality of political and democratic participation. So I think that those are very important, especially now that we can see that people's interest in traditional forms of representative politics are declining, and there are a lot of issues and crises going on, and we need people's input in new ways. I've been studying, for example, the Finnish Citizens Initiative, which is something that was adopted in Finland more than a decade ago. It's an agenda initiative allowing people to bring issues on parliamentary agenda. It's been really popular. More than 80% of Finns have used it, and especially young people are using it. And we can see some actual policy impact. It has brought about some legislative change in Finland. But we can also see that in some cases it has the kind of changes they have brought up. They have actually impacted the political agenda and political discourses, and they have also strengthened some claims, not just created, but also strengthened some claims that are made by traditional political actors. So there are very many different mechanisms of influence you can see. So I think it is also important when we are talking about kind of protests and civic activism. I think it's very important that we pay attention to the mediating institutions, and we try to create these venues of communication between citizens and policymakers, and really properly design these institutions so that they are not for window dressing or something that make the illusion of participation, but they actually provide people influence. So in this respect, I'm really idealistic in the sense that I think it's important to create these kind of institutional venues for for participation and dialogue between policymakers and citizens, ordinary citizens. And I think the main risk is really that sometimes we are kind of too cautious, and policymakers are too cautious when they are designing these institutions. They are worried about the citizens' impact, and therefore they remain really detached from the actual processes. Think about the European Citizens Initiative, for example, which is maybe not such a success story so far.
Maybe not so much so far. Does anybody else want to come in and add anything on this idea of, what makes participation matter? So how can we think about impacts from different kinds of protest or also civic activism as well? Anybody else want to come in? Mariam.
Sorry. So I think it's fine here. So I come from Georgia, and it was an ex-Soviet Union country, and then we had a totalitarian, absolute fraud government since the Soviet Union broke down. And in 2003 there was a revolution, and then we had a pro-European government that was leading the country. There were innovations, there was economic growth, and the country was very, very rapidly developing. But that government was also, it was by revolution. And then in 2013 was the first year ever where Georgian government was elected by the elections. It was the first time where not everything was decided in the streets and on the protests, but it was actually changed with the ballots with the elections. And that was such a big precedent, because we Georgians would celebrate it, saying that, we finally moved from the protests from the revolutions to, and Mariam and other Georgians would remember that we were actually very happy about it. And I think that was when we kind of lost the eyesight of the important part of that you can't take it for granted, because in today's world the democracy anymore is not a textbook definition governing style. It's, I think, what we make out of it, and it's the commitment that we are ready to put in it. And if the citizens are committed enough to fight for it, then we can have the democracy. But the second we take it for granted, then this is what we get, what we have right now in Georgia. Because what we had at the democratic government, the rapidly growing economy, the pro-European country that was developing very fast, the government that was chosen by the elections, I think that is thing that we took for granted. And we kind of turned we turned our backs to the problems. And, there was some small problems, we didn't protest. Then there was some small issue with the government, we didn't protest, because somehow we took the big things for granted. And then at the end, we faced a totalitarian regime that we're facing right now. And I think if we've detected the problem on the first step, and we actually were loud about the problems at the beginning, I don't think that the government would have dared to go that far. But I think we started to fight too late. And for me, that is the mistake that I'll probably never forgive myself, that I was not as active, because that I was not involved and I was not very loud to the first problems that I could see on TV, on the news outlets, for instance. Because right now, participation, yes, it matters. And I think that Georgia is right now paying the price of the participation, because today is 435th day of continuous protest. It's been a year and a half of continuous protest. Every day for 435 days, people's been on the street protesting. And it's exhausting, it's draining. But I think if we started this fight 5 years ago, it might have been 100 days. If we started it 7 years ago, it might have been a month. But I think because we started so late, I think this is the late participation price that we are paying right now is over 200 political prisoners, absolutely undemocratic laws where we face up to 1 year in jail for standing on the sidewalk. So I think very important is when you start to participate. And what do you mean in participation? Because participation is not only elections, participation is not only, voting, but participation is also following day-to-day life in the country and understanding that some things are going backwards and you taking the responsibility of addressing those issues. And it's not only like today's world, we say activists, and somehow it's kind of new profession, but activism is not a profession. Like I'm not an activist. First of all, I have my own profession. I have 2 kids. I have family. So activist is very broad, and somehow it also narrows us down to some people that are very loud about the things that they don't like. But no, like activists are people. Activists are professionals. They are doctors. They are, they are teachers. And it's not, activism is something, activism is taking the responsibility, but it's not a profession. So you can't leave everything to the activists, because like when you, like someone, a teacher in the school is not protesting because she's the teacher and there are activists to protest, like maybe I am a teacher as well, but at the same time I'm in the street protesting. So I think that's the part of the participation, which is also very important.
Okay, thank you. Maybe I'll pick up a few points from both of you there and address a question to you, Christian. So if we're thinking about, I guess some of what you're saying, Mariam, is perhaps easier for us to imagine in national situations. And we have these sort of difficulties when we get to, we're talking about the transnational and the European, etc., and how that can pose some challenges in terms of democratic imaginations of participation. So my question for you, Christian, would be about, if we're talking about something like the European Parliament or the European Union or the European Green Deal or whatever we want to be talking about at this sort of, imagined European level, what we're faced with in reality are quite tricky technical questions. We're faced with a landscape where there is a lot of what academics call insider strategies, should be more like lobbying or quite technical kinds of forms of participation. Maybe you're responding to a call by the European Commission to say something about a bit of proposed legislation or something like this. But often, without things like protest behind that, some of the outsider forces, let's say the citizens' voices, are a little bit lost, perhaps, in European Union decision making. How do you negotiate, for example, this sort of insider-outsider ideas in your work in the European Parliament, where the voices of citizens, especially right now around issues of climate change, biodiversity loss, climate breakdown, are presumably very important to protecting what Europe tries to do in terms of green politics and how it could do better in green politics?
Is this one? Is it? Hello? Yes.
Just playing past them up.
Sounds, at least the last row can say if they hear. Very good. Okay. Thanks for the very complicated question. I come from a group. I'm working for Daniel Freund, but like others of his colleagues, basically come directly from protest movements. Michael Bloss from Germany, Lena Schilling from Austria, I think also Benedetta from Italy. They all have protest movements basically as experience that brought them into the role they are in now as members of European Parliament of the Greens. So sometimes, and I think the whole climate movement has shown they are very much trusting the political system because they are appealing mostly to the political system, demand sometimes only the implementation of laws that are already made or constitutional guarantees to be actually lived in legislation. What is I think instrumental I guess you spoke of the doctors, of the professionals in very normal life roles, but having talked to colleagues of yours also in non-governmental organizations in Georgia, and the topic being the same in all of the EU, many of those protests, even the most bottom up, at least profit from networks, from rooms to go to actually live democracy of some sort of civil society organizations. And we have seen that, like, in numbers, there are 25,000 roughly lobbyists here in Brussels, second biggest amount of lobbyists in the world, probably at one spot after Washington DC, depends how you count. And the vast majority of course represent like economically strong, financially strong interests of big companies, of rich individuals, and it's a small minority that represents more like citizens at large, general societal interests that are not specifically profit driven, and they are always somehow only a balance of these many others, of these real insiders that like invite me to evenings with drinks, with events, with concerts, with all sorts of things, to put me in databases and reach out to me at moments that it's important that I somehow copy paste their amendments into EU law. And others have it much more difficult against that. But then still, we have seen that in 2019, when more people were thinking to talk about the extreme right or other topics, like a young stubborn woman from Sweden went on climate protests and created a movement that in the end steered so much the public debate that it became the reason, with all those people on the streets, with all this movement behind them, that actually became possible to do something as big as the Green Deal, indeed. So it's a lot of street credibility and energy that actually made real legislation only possible. I would say that people like Ursula von der Leyen turned their agenda in that direction, and now backwards, that these are not anymore so much on the street, and other people are more on the street. So what I find important to say also here is that this like probably the last acknowledgement of how important that has been is that now there's a very deliberate attacks against these civil society organizations. There's like a lot of organizations and groups on the right in the European Parliament that drive a narrative that NGOs are lefty, bought-up organizations that misuse money for things that would be supposedly illegal. And they haven't been stopped by the European Commission, by the European Court of Auditors, both having said that no rule by any NGO has been breached. But nevertheless, we have a scrutiny working group that works continuously and tries to find proof for violations that are not there. And it's all driven by basically cutting the little money that is there to support this networking on European level, because there are so many NGOs in all of countries all over the EU, but to influence then this indeed very complicated lawmaking in the EU, where you need to know when is the deadline for amendment, who do you need to talk to actually put your opinion into something that will actually change the life of 450 million Europeans, then you need to have some idea of the processes, and for that you need umbrella organizations that bring together those many people on the ground and know about the processes in Brussels, and they have a little funding in some cases. Earlier this was a cross-party thing that was supported. My former boss Sven Giegold had like Markus Ferber from the CSU on the other end of the democratic spectrum all come together and support that for organizations that would balance the nearly exclusively banking lobbyists in the Econ committee. And now there's a big push to cut that money, that little funding that is there for such umbrella organizations, oftentimes coming from the LIFE program now, but to be seen how it's called in the next MFF, and that is really scary. And these attacks, although they are not based in facts, go on, and we try to counter them. In this live program, for example, there's 12 times as much money as is paid for all NGOs together to BASF, a German chemical production company, and 7 times as much paid for Shell, which have, of course, all interesting projects of somehow investing also a little bit in renewables and so on, and then found some funding also applying to them. It's just a lot more than to the NGOs. And so that's a big issue. And talking about the complexity of political processes, and like you said, you would have loved to come at the right time. That is oftentimes, of course, also like I've received so many inputs to laws when basically the whole process was over, and it had just reached this one moment that it's actually on the headlines of something because something was decided. Of course, this is very tragic that you missed the right point, but it's also deliberately made so by the intransparency of the process. So I would say one of the biggest challenges in EU legislation to actually come at the right time is the intense intransparency of it. And it's already now sort of against the law. You have a law from 2001 called like number is 1049 for the transparency nerds in the audience, and it's basically saying even the preparatory legislative documents, like the trilogue documents, like this informal coming together of the 3 institutions making negotiating laws in real outside everything that we still as EU put in exhibitions that we send around the EU and explain how our legislation works. It doesn't really exist there, but it exists very much in the practice. And all these in-between steps, the in-between compromises on text are supposed to be proactively published on the institution's pages. But we don't do that. And when I, in a law on anti-corruption harmonization of criminal law, suggested to the very pro-European, very pro-transparency colleague who led these technical negotiations, he was like immediately, oh no, like if I would do that now, where it's so the norm that this is not transparent, the colleagues in the council on the other side of the negotiation would like stop and destroy all the compromises that we've achieved so far if now we are all of a sudden doing it. So like the illegal norm is more normal than the actual law, and that's of course a big problem. And now we have another law that has a name on information security and basically tries to turn this around. And once the EPP rapporteur on the file will be done with negotiating on returns of asylum seekers, she will probably come back to that. The council is at the moment negotiating its position on that. Basically, the commission proposal is sort of reversing from normal is public and exception can perhaps make it non-public to normal is an internal document, and if it's really to be published, then this needs to be decided specifically. So these are big challenges, and I'm happy about every possibility to come out here and talk about such nerdy transparency issues that sometimes are not always receiving the big attention. Last thing I would say at that point, our resistance to the algorithms that usually make that very difficult to reach out to normal people. We offer everybody who likes to know more how those topics develop further to sign up for the emails that we occasionally send out when we think something really important is happening. So I'm having a list very traditionally on paper, and everybody who would like to sign up to can already do that here.
This is very old school and I like it. So, I mean, maybe I'll try and make a small summary so far. So we know that the protest matters for the big questions, and sometimes we get to protest too late when we realise that all these small technical decisions have amounted to something that is seen as threatening us. Maija mentioned also these sort of almost spaces of translation, I guess, between levels, between people, I guess, at what we could call the grassroots and people who are more clued into these procedures, which can get technical and tricky and difficult to follow, and hidden, sometimes consciously, sometimes less consciously. I'm not sure. I'll leave that to you guys to think about. So sometimes, of course, then these spaces of translation can be sucked into this sort of technicalness. So I wonder, Maija, do you have any thoughts about, you mentioned, these spaces of responsiveness, spaces of listening where we can almost take what, folks on the street are worried about and translate them, if you like, into political processes. But could those also turn into the kinds of, I guess, the ECI example, where we make something so technical and complicated that we lose the politics again and we lose the translation element? Just really quickly before we come back.
Sure, there are examples of that too, and of course there is a risk that if you have an institutional form of participation and allowing people to voice their concerns, and then politicians or policymakers just dismiss them and don't listen, of course that increases distrust. So there is this risk, and of course, but I guess that's a part of politics too, that people are distrustful, sometimes for good reasons and sometimes for less good reasons. So I think we should not be so much afraid of that, but we should also make sure that there is a proper procedure to deal with these voices that are expressed through these channels, and that the policymakers would have the time and energy for responsive communication and to respond to these concerns. So I think these are three. But I'm still very much into institutional forms and kind of procedures and transparency as well. That whatever follows up is kind of procedure and transparent. So I think there's so much to develop in these respects.
I agree, and I guess the things are more linked than we sometimes portray, I guess, in some of our work. We tend to sort of talk about protest as this kind of one thing that happens, and institutions as maybe the more proper way of how things happen. But these two things are historically deeply interlinked and embedded within each other, even in, very recent examples at the transnational level, like Greta Thunberg, which I pronounce completely wrongly and I'm aware of, Thunberg or something, and the European Green Deal. Thunberg is okay. Thank you. Tack. But let's come back to the grassroots, and I'll come to Mariam now. And I was saying when we opened this debate, there are really worrying trends of repression moving across the world, moving across Europe, and certainly in Georgia, where you were from. So I wonder if I can ask you about protest in a time of repression, and if you wish to say something about another interest we have in this project, which is about emotionally what that means and what emotion means when we're talking about democracy and distrust and moving these questions forward and protecting democracy.
As we were speaking, I think at some point it's all about realizing the risks and taking the risks and being okay with risking it for the better cause, which is not personal, but it has a bit a bigger meaning for the country, for my family, and etc. And like currently me sitting here live streaming, I am committing a crime with new laws in Georgia. Crossing the border, there might be a criminal case, and I might face up to 1 year in jail because my presence here is not approved by the government. So also with current laws, if I have a project going on in Georgia and I get a funding from some foundation in Brussels, for instance, I will face prison up to 6 years because those fundings are not approved by the government. I will go to prison for 1 year if I stand on the sidewalk with the banner and protest something that government doesn't like. And it's only like a small list of charges that actually, the criminal cases that actually send you to prison. I leave alone the countless number of fines that we get for protesting in the street, which is financial fines. It's, for instance, just participating on the protests right now is 5,000 laris, which is 10 times more than somehow average salary in Georgia. So when we talk about the cost of the participation and the price that we pay, it's quite monetary as well, in a sense that you go and you protest, but you well know that you can't afford to pay the fine if you are fined. And by fines, I don't mean that police going around trying to identify you or something. The half of the city centre is covered with the Chinese cameras running on Russian softwares for the face detection. So the same way as you get fines for speeding tickets in the street, the same way we get a text for being fined the next day, or even instantly just passing by in front of the camera. So there are huge risks. And then there is a countless level of threats that come to you and to your family and to anyone who is employed in the government around you, and it's countless. And it comes with an emotional burnout, because considering it's been, again, 435 days, it is a lot. It is a lot. It's the part of the routine, and keeping up the routine as it is, it's very difficult. And when you add all the emotional, physical, different aspects of it, it's tough. And then you start questioning to what end. And when you find the right answers, I think that makes the risks a bit easier, because for us, to what end is not just I don't know, less income tax or some regulations that have been waived for the country. It's bigger than that. For us, has been an historical fight. Right now, what is happening in Georgia is that totalitarian pro-Russian government is trying to turn us into Russia's backyard. And we've been there, we've done that, we know that it sucks. It sucks big time, and we've done that for longer than we were supposed to do. We've been through Soviet Union, we had another 15 years of like real BS there happening, and we've done that. We are over, we don't want it anymore. And because of that, we had civil wars, we fought, we finally got somewhere where we could actually breathe on our own. And what's happening right now, they're dragging back to where we've been and where we escaped. So for us, it's not just about Europe and the grand ideas or better tax or better this or like free travel. For us, it's about our history, it's about our identity, whether or not we stay on the map as a sovereign country. Or do we actually have the sovereign government that actually rules for the interests of the people? Not of the activists, not of for the people. And also we have to consider that Georgia is a very small country. Currently it's like 3.5 million. So just in 2008, when we had August War, we had over 25,000 refugees within a week. So half of the country has a PTSD of war, that been through the war, and that the other half has an experience because their neighbors or their friends or their relatives have been through it. My family's been a refugee twice in my lifetime. I'm 34. So when your neighbor countries have war, and your government claims to bring you peace because they're close to Russia, you know, I might not be threatened or concerned about it, but from the average citizen who doesn't have the luxuries of sitting here, of listening to you guys and listening to the surveys and listening to this and reading that, for an actual farmer whose life depends on the grapes and spends most of the time on his plot of land, and hears something about that, and you know, like, your house is safe, your land is safe, but from them, safety, it matters. And that's how it's easy to manipulate the minds of the people, and how easy it is to, you know, just sit there and think that, like, it's fine. But what you said, it's very correct about Europe being slow, and we as Georgians suffered through that for many times. And again, I will bring back the example of August War in 2008, because back then when Georgians, we were saying that Russia is the threat to Europe, and like you have to address the issue and have to help us. Somehow Georgians were the boys who cried the wolf, and there was a humanitarian help, but really militarily wise, no one actually cared. What happened next? We had Crimea. And somehow, like, Europe was still yawning and like almost there, but not quite. And boom, there are bombs falling on Ukraine right now, on Kiev, and suddenly everyone's awake. But you know, in 2008, if there was a proper action against it, I'm pretty sure the Ukraine situation will quite different right now. And yes, there is like the key recommendations right now is like protesters, like protecting them and the funding. And Europe, like the first thing about stolen elections in Georgia in October, Europe was very loud and clear about not financing the government, a legitimate government anymore, and financing the NGOs and the civil organizations in Georgia. And they actually said the amount of money they will give. But has anyone seen an euro from there? No. Is there any funding coming? No. What we see is that basically because of the laws, even like the big organizations in Europe right now actually scared to finance us, the people that are ready to take the risk to keep working on the field, including the media outlets, independent media outlets, etc. So it feels more like every time we come to Europe, they have an amazing evacuation plan for us. They have a very good emergency exits, etc. But actually, us back in Georgia, we are the people who are on the ground ready to fight, but we don't find the support because we are fighting totalitarian regime with our bare hands, and we are fighting it for Europe. But it feels like it's a one-way street. We're going somewhere and there is no one to meet us. And this is how slow the Europe has been, unfortunately. And I'm sorry to say that, because like we would say that like there'll be sanctions and, you know, like there will be actions put against the legitimate government for the actions that they are doing against their own people. But everyone knows that it will be so slow that by the time there are any sanctions, it would not matter anymore. And that's been it. If the sanctions or if the regulations of anything was done in Europe and in US and in UK before this, we will probably will not have the new law about I don't know, standing on the sidewalk. But they well know that they can do anything they want, and the world will not care. So yeah, these are the risks that A, all what I said, and B, you might be fighting and then you fight and they actually promise the support which you never get. And I think it will be very honest if they just say that we won't be there for you to help. And if we know that we are alone, maybe we will adjust our fight as well. Sorry.
Does anybody else have anything to add on repressive contexts and this, I guess, more very general idea that distrust can be productive of protection of democracy, that distrust doesn't come from always just a failure to understand what a policy is trying to do, and if we explain it better then people will be on board. Sometimes there are good reasons for distrust, and responsiveness is including to protest is really an important part of that, and in a context of increasing repression, I think it's really important to keep saying protest is important and productive and democratic. Christian. And then I'm going to open to the floor.
Like, it's very difficult to speak after that. I've talked to a colleague of yours when I was visiting, and I've been very impressed by like a lot of resistance among people. By the graffiti on a stone close to a glacier in the landscape, where you think, okay, wow, politics also made it here. I don't really have a good answer to immediate help. Like Daniel and I have spent quite some time trying to argue for overcoming vetoes in foreign politics that are usually in the way, especially when like Russia has 1-2 friends usually around the council table, and then like we've trained a bit how to avoid them. Yes, if we really want to, I guess it also has to do with like not enough people appreciating how important Georgia would be and how much we owe and how much we should involve ourselves more. And I'm not sure I can immediately do a lot more to help that. I just want to take another time, like your warning on EU matters, that like in Italy, there is now, with the new government under Meloni, who is very clever, who is very much more avoiding to be the perfect enemy like Viktor Orban is. And nevertheless, her interior minister has banned a lot of protests. And like, if you're a student and you don't get the government permission to do your protest, then you're liable to things in court. And like a Green colleague working in Rome told me, like her half-adult son has already 2 court cases on his neck. So it's going definitely also the wrong direction. The independence of Italian judiciary is to be limited in a very clever way that also addresses like legitimate concerns about court cases taking forever, but then limiting the independence of the prosecution and the courts is a very dangerous thing. So definitely something to fight there. We have this law on defense of democracy that is supposed to make us more safe against Russia-funded things inside the EU by obliging organizations to disclose third country financing. But then exactly that sort of logic has been used. You said it for Georgia, and it has happened so also in Hungary, in Poland, and elsewhere, that this is an instrument to, like, first you defund civil society, then when they need the funding from somewhere else, you make that a criminal thing. And so you structurally weaken civil society more and more. Just to end on a slightly more positive note, my MEP has blocked half of the funding for Viktor Orban over like the 6 years in Parliament, with the conditionality, and I think that has helped a bit. And in Hungary, after many years and a lot of elections that Viktor Orban won with a mix of certain degree of repression, but also like being able to fund enough loyalists to always just have the majority he needs, with electoral law that is more and more geared in his interest. I think that's more and more coming into difficulties now that the corruption is so widespread that it has become more unacceptable to people. And then with the courageous mayor and the same Chinese cameras deployed over Budapest, nevertheless, in a forbidden pride, 300,000 people came out because, like, in a way, fear had changed a bit the side, or fear had faded away a bit, and people saw that it's too important, and that sort of alliances that, like, people have seen that it's not just a pride, it's basically their right to protest that is at stake. And when I was there, and 10% of the European Parliament have been on the streets as well, probably also helping a bit the fact that, like, no violence was used against this big protest, but like so many old heterosexual couples have been in that protest, like I've rarely seen anywhere else being on a pride. And that was really a fantastic energy, that if one protest can be credited afterwards of perhaps Viktor Orban losing the elections on the 12th of April, then probably that protest is definitely a very important one on that side. But yeah, it's like a long time since he was elected, and since he made things worse and worse to get to that point.
So stay vigilant, keep up solidarity, take risks. Let me open this to the floor. I think we have...
It's Andy Vermoot in the Gazette.be. I want to give you my card because there are Europeans who care. So we actually don't know that there are more than 200 political prisoners there. And I'm asking myself, what do you want us to do to help you raising awareness regarding these political prisoners? And is also the European Court competent to do something about this? So these are the two questions that I have for you.
So I will start from the court cases and judiciary system because that's something I wanted to mention and I forgot. So the court right now is most of the judges that do the judge against us are the ones that in the pocket of the Georgian Dream, the ruling party. There are we always know that if there is a court case against the activists or politicians or etc., we know specifically if it's administrative charges, we know which judge would be, and if criminal case, we know which judge it will be. Not one specific, but there's a group of pocketed judge that we will know that they will for sure, no matter what, rule against it. Before coming here, one of my dearest friend, a political prisoner, a mother of four, Elena Khoshdaria, who is in prison facing 7 years to the jail, just making a writing on a banner of a candidate of a mayor, stupid really. We were speaking, we write letters to each other. She's in prison and we spoke about what points to make here and what I should talk about. And I was even saying before that this is how we participate, and this is the cost that these people are paying, that she has left underage 4 kids at home and risked everything, understanding that she will go to prison doing that, but she's still participating because we know that it matters, because we know how important this fight is. And we have almost 200 people like that. And if you see the files, the court cases, the criminal case, you will understand that they have nothing. Rezuk Ignaze is in prison right now for throwing a tissue at the police. There is a literally video where he's throwing a tissue, and this is what the police have brought to the court. And he is in prison. There is no visible cases against them, but it doesn't matter. But it matters to the European Court. All these cases, each and every case that has brought to the European Court has been won against Georgia, but also it's not something to be proud of. I don't want to be going against my country. This is the win that I don't want. I want the court system and I want my government to be there so that I don't have to argue my case internationally. That is something. So yes, we always win the cases in Strasbourg, like we do win. But is it really a win? Because every winning and every fine that Georgia has to pay to us, for me, is a loss. For me, it's the decrease of democracy. For me, it's devastating. No. So yes and no, it's not really a win. And what can be done? Zia Maglobeli is the head of a independent news outlet. He slapped the police officer and he's in prison. She's in prison right now. She was on a hunger strike for many, many days. She's losing her eyesight. She's in prison and she's not getting any medical treatment. She's not there. So it's not about it is about a woman, a head of a media outlet. She won the Sakharov's Prize this year. And how many of you do know about it? Even the ones that work in the news, or no one? Because I understand that there are bigger things happening in the world, but also there are equally big things happening that somehow we don't get an attention. And if someone asks me why I'm sitting here, if I'm committing a crime, because of this, because I understand that each and every state where I can voice what is happening in Georgia is important, because the political prisoners are not just a number. It's people. They're somebody's husband, somebody's son, somebody's daughters, somebody's lives, and it's very, very important that the fight goes on. Why street protests? Why am I proud of being on the streets for that long? It's not because we're so stubborn and because like it's the longest standing protest in the history, I think, after the Washington guy who was standing there for 60 years, I think. No, there is nothing to be proud about, but because for me, these political prisoners are not just names. For me, these are the people who are fighting. These are the people that even in prison, they didn't break. They are still standing on the right side, and there's even from the prison they're fighting. Each and every letter, each and every statement, everything, even in the court rooms, what they say, you can see what a committed, devoted citizens they are, how strongly they believe in the idea of the better country. So that's it. That's the risk was taking as well. And what you can do is like, I don't know, time to time, maybe go to Radio Liberty, Georgia, which is like pretty much international and everyone knows about it. You might not know like local Georgian news outlets, but Radio Liberty is known everywhere. And check Georgian section, checks what's happening, and maybe do a little bit of a research, because like it's been more than a year and a half since the protests going on, and to leave alone everything else, at least it is the long and standing continuous protest so far, more than any other protest. So at least out of curiosity, you can go and sometimes check and say, what's happening? Are they still as stubborn as they were yesterday? Is it still going on? And maybe that's the curiosity that will lead you somewhere. I don't know. Thank you.
I have permission to go a couple of minutes over from.
I don't know. Is it me? Thank you. Hi, I'm Laura from the Flamingo Collective. You mentioned the word emotion and emotional, and it's hard not to be emotional listening to you. And thank you for bringing that to this city that sometimes lacks emotion in certain circles. What makes me very worried about participation is the sort of complete lack of acknowledgement and the complete cynicism in the process. So I don't know if there's anyone here from the European Commission, but just a couple of examples from the last year. The Red Line protest took place twice. Here, 110,000 people out in the streets in the name of ending genocide. Never an acknowledgement from Ursula von der Leyen. What Christian Beck talked about just now in terms of the complete destruction of the NGO sector, particularly the green NGOs, but actually well beyond, and what that means. And then finally, also just seeing the fact that I left the NGO sector in 2024, and in that mandate, the Commission President hadn't met a single NGO. And so it's a constant corporate capture of this situation. Something's got to give there, and sometimes I worry more about the centrists than the far right, because they have considerably more power. And so I think it is our responsibility to speak to those centrists about the cynicism that breeds a kind of vicious circle in all of this. And I just want to say thank you so much for what you've brought, because we need a shitload more of these discussions in this town. Thank you.
One final.
Can you guys hear me? Okay. I just had a question. I guess, do you or any other protesters, activists, Georgians, have they proposed or have any ideas regarding changes to international law or EU reforms in a way that, regardless of loss of confidence and hope of involvement, are there any ideas for that to change that could come from that, or is it just hope of involvement? I'm just curious as to like, are there any proposals maybe?
So Georgia is not a EU member, so I think we should start from there. So it's a little bit different. What we can hope for is so we've been partnering. So we are hoping for the membership. So and we started the negotiation plan and everything. So I think that is what was threatened. And what Europe can do? It's like, yes, it's sanctions first of all, but it can't be just those scary words on the paper, but something actually visible, that's disturbing for the legitimate government, and it could be the support of the protest, even the verbal support, which means a lot, because I think it's very difficult from here to understand it, but when you are protesting and you are in the streets, and you know that in the country, police, government, judiciary system, all the institutions are against you, and you feel really, really alone. Knowing that you have a very powerful international supporters is something that keeps you going. Each and every sanction, even like the tiniest one that might mean nothing for Georgian dream, for us, for the protesters, for the people in the streets, it's the one. It's the small win, it's the small battle that we won again. So it might not be something that actually makes the biggest change, but it's something that A, gives us the motivation to keep fighting, B, gives us the feeling that we are actually heard and visible, maybe not from our government, but at least from the friends that we aim to deepen our relationship to. So it's, if we take like your human relationships, like if I ask you for a favor and you are there to grant it, not because you expect something of me, but because you understand that I actually need help, which is the help that my parents didn't provide for me. It's something that you appreciate. It's like it could be brought to that human level that to keep fighting you need a motivation, and those motivations sometimes doesn't come from home. It comes from somewhere else, and you have to be that somewhere else.
I think I have to end it here. I'm really sorry. Hopefully people will stay around afterwards and we'll be able to continue these conversations. But thank you so much to this panel for bringing the human back in.